My friends, Donald Trump may be blocked by all these judges, by all these courts. He is currently, his administration is dealing with a Supreme Court argument over universal injunctions and birthright citizenship. But another key component as to whether or not he's going to be able to get the job done is going to be his big, beautiful bill, they call it. We got the story from NPR. The latest roadblock for House Republicans' big, beautiful bill, Senate Republicans. Indeed. As House Speaker Mike Johnson feverishly works to finalize the details of a massive package that includes major portions of Trump's agenda, many Senate Republicans are dismissing the legislation before it even finished the House. Unfortunately, it's a sad joke, said Senator Ron Johnson. Wimpy and anemic were the words used by Rand Paul. The House package, which the Speaker says he wants to advance through the chamber before Memorial Day recess, aims for $1.5 trillion in spending cuts to offset the costs of making the 2017 Trump tax cuts permanent. It also contains tax breaks that Trump campaigned on in 2024, no taxes on tips, and overtime, which I'm a big fan of. But those provisions are temporary. Some conservatives in the House are pushing for $2 trillion in cuts. But that's not far enough for Johnson, who wants spending levels to revert back to what they were pre-pandemic. Senator Johnson told reporters that he believes it was a mistake for leaders to try to pass so much of Trump's agenda in one single bill. And cited 3 separate pieces of legislation that could be considered individually. As a result, he said he'd oppose the House bill as it's currently constructed. Now I'm going to tell you, I think speaking with Rep. Massey is going to be enlightening. Though he tends to be against many of these big universal packages, the challenge I see. Look, my friends, I hate to say it, but I don't like these universal bills. I don't like these big spending packages. We should be doing single item spending. But for right now, we have an existential crisis. Is there room for Trump to just get this one through so that he can enact his agenda and make sure we clear a runway so that we are able to win moving forward? Now, I'm going to be joined by Rep. Thomas Massey. Of course, we're big fans. I think he is we call him the best member of Congress that we got, despite our disagreements. And let's see if we can get him. Rep. Massey, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Tim.
How's it going? How you doing?
Well, we had a 4-day weekend and now we've got a 3-day work week. They called off votes tomorrow. So
really,
it's, first world congressional problems, I reckon.
Right. Yeah. So you guys, I shouldn't say you guys, but Congress. There's a video of them sleeping, and
I saw that.
To be fair, that was like an overnight hearing, though, wasn't it?
Yeah, some of these hearings go really long. The
Wow.
Democrats are being very dilatory and offering amendments just to drag it out.
So, we've been talking about the Supreme Court hearing pertaining to birthright citizenship as well as universal injunctions. The Trump administration has faced a ridiculous amount of these universal injunctions. So it seems like while he's gotten a lot done as it pertains to DOJ and some of these other efforts, he's still facing roadblocks every which way. Now he wants this big, beautiful spending package, despite the fact that the MAGA base last year was saying no to these big spending packages. I suppose my view is largely we need to move as quickly as we can before the midterms so that we can enact some of those agenda items that we want to see done from the Trump administration. But I'm curious your thoughts. What's currently going on with this big, beautiful bill, and where do you stand on it?
Well, I think the big, beautiful bill is in trouble a little bit. That's why you see the speaker letting us out of Congress a day early this week. It's got problems. It's got warts. What would I do? Well, in an ideal world, I'd make it deficit neutral. I wouldn't be adding to the deficit like this bill does. And in a pragmatic world, if you want to get something done quickly, they probably need to skinny this thing down. And it's just got too many things in it right now, too many things that are objectionable. And there's a lot of sort of shell games going on. A lot of the cuts are backloaded and won't happen until Trump leaves office. And the problem with that is it looks real good on a 10-year window, but the reality is that the lobbyists will have their way. They've got 4 years to make sure those cuts never actually happen. And that's a problem. So let me give you an example, Tim. The Green New Deal, which was part of the Inflation Reduction Act, that should be a no-brainer. We should just repeal every part of that, root and branch, right? Well, here's what they've done. they've decided to cut residential solar subsidies. Okay, I'm not for any subsidies, but they've decided if you're a homeowner, those subsidies, or they're called tax credits, those tax credits go away. But if you're a corporation, they keep going for at least 4 more years. And so the interesting thing is that sets up a scenario where solar will still be subsidized, but instead of owning the panels on your house, that won't be financially practical. They're pushing you into leasing them from a
Wow.
corporation or an installer. The other thing that does is it gives the corporations and companies 4 years to lobby to keep their subsidies going, because their subsidies won't end for 4 years. Let me tell you another thing in this bill. So no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime. Well, I'm really interested in those. Two of those three are bills that I introduced into Congress: no tax on tips and no tax on Social Security. I've been introducing that bill for about a decade now, trying to get that passed. But the reality is, those tax cuts aren't exactly what they say, and those only last 3 years. So as soon as
Wow.
Trump leaves office, those expire. Those aren't permanent. And the reason they did that is they cost a lot of money. Now, I think the most controversial tax cut provision in here, by the way, I haven't seen a tax cut I don't like, right? I love all the tax cuts. Let's cut all the taxes, okay? Let's slash them. But we need to cut spending at the same time. There is one tax cut in here that doesn't really make sense, and that is to raise the SALT deduction, state and local tax deduction. It's a big deal to Republicans from blue states. And by the way, there's no Senate appetite for this tax provision because you don't have senators from blue states. They run statewide. You don't have Republican senators from blue states.
Right.
That would be California and New York and Illinois, for instance. Well, but you have Republicans in the House from those states. There are some districts, believe it or not, that do lean Republican. Those guys have been given the biggest gift ever. It's bad tax policy, and they're still not happy with it. The state and local tax deduction in the big beautiful bill, as it's written, would go from $10,000. Like, let's say you've got a nice house and you pay $10,000 of taxes on it. Well, that lets you out of $10,000 of federal tax. We can argue about whether you should get out of any federal tax just because your local and state government is gouging you. But the speaker has agreed to raise that to $30,000. You have to have a pretty nice house to have $30,000 of tax on it. And the blue state Republicans are not happy with that. They want more. And even though it would reduce the tax income coming into the government, the federal government, which generally is not a bad thing, it means you've got to take that from somewhere else. And so it's a gift to California and New York, and it shouldn't be in there.
One thing I want to clarify too, I understand most people know this, but for those that don't, the deficit is, what is this perpetual overspending of our budget forever, basically increasing the deficit. I've talked to a lot of people and they confuse debt and deficit.
Yeah.
And the deficit just means that I'm pretty sure actually, maybe you can tell me, how long has it been that the U.S. government consistently spends more than it brings in?
Well, on April 15th, it depends on the time window you're looking at. On April 15th, my debt counter actually went the other way because for a brief week, everybody pays their taxes. And I mean, it's encouraging and discouraging at the same time that my debt clock goes down for a week, but that's the week everybody pays their taxes. But if you're looking for a 1-year period, you'd have to go back to the 90s when Republicans, who were actually conservative back then, I guess, imposed some restraints on Bill Clinton. And they also put things like welfare reform and work requirements. And guess what? If you look at the big, beautiful bill, there are Medicaid work requirements for able-bodied individuals, but there are loopholes you could drive a truck through, and they don't kick in until Trump leaves office. Like, in other words, they'll probably never happen. And the loophole says that you don't really have to work as long as you're undergoing a training program that your state approves of. Well, the state will have some, like California and New York, they'll have some kind of $10 online training program that qualifies you for Medicaid, even if you're an able-bodied single individual with no kids.
Is Trump, I'm assuming there's things in this that Trump wants, but is he just basically willing to accept these concessions knowing they expire by the time he leaves because he wants to get his agenda through?
It could be. I think a lot of this he doesn't know. I think, for instance, the example I gave you about the solar subsidies, how we're cutting, there are no tax credits for homeowners, but the tax credits for corporations continue. I doubt he is aware of those subtleties like that. He's probably putting a lot of faith in Mike Johnson and John Thune and just saying, okay, guys, whatever you got to do to get this done, pay off the blue state New York Republicans and California Republicans, do what you got to do and just get this bill passed. I think the problem is that Mike Johnson isn't being completely forthright with the president. Maybe they can roll the Freedom Caucus at the end. I know there's a lot of grumbling from some conservative Republican senators and from some conservative Republicans here in the House who predominantly belong to the Freedom Caucus. Maybe they just plan to roll them at the end because in addition to the tax cuts, this bill has spending increases, but it's the kind of spending that if you don't spend the money, you could get in trouble in a Republican primary. The spending increases, for instance, are for the military, another over $100 million for the military. You've got HHS, Border Security. There's going to be over $50 billion there. And also for Border Security in the Judiciary Committee, you can have another $100 million of spending there. And they'll say, if you're a Republican, they'll try to run an ad. Oh, by the way, and the Golden Dome is in there. They'll run ads of an intercontinental ballistic missile hitting St. Louis. He voted against protecting our country. He voted against enforcing the border. Those are the kind of ads they'll run against you if you vote against that, but against a big, beautiful bill. But you know what? Frankly, I don't care. I'm not going to stand here and lie to you. You cannot have free cake and eat it too. It will catch up on us. Our bond ratings right now on a 10-year bond, we're paying like 4.5%. That's going to go up. So not only are we over time, this gets to your deficit question. Not only are we increasing the deficit, which is the annual shortfall in spending, but we'll add to the debt another probably $25-30 trillion over the next 10 years. Right now it's 32 trillion. But one of the worst parts is we're paying $1 trillion of interest on the debt we already owe. And that number is going to go up because our bond rating will go down when the foreign sovereign wealth funds take a look at our financials and see we're not serious.
Yeah, but I heard from AOC that we can just keep deficit spending to cover our costs. I mean, why not?
Well, during COVID, they printed $5 trillion and, people thought the $1,200 checks were such a great deal. The problem is at the time I said, that's the cheese in the trap. Your cost of living has gone way the hell up more than $1,200 or $600 or the $1,400 check.
It's
all those
crazy.
Three checks added together don't equal the AOC math, which was Republican math at the time in 2020.
Right.
As well.
Yeah, I shouldn't rag on her for something the Republicans did too. No, but she was talking about healthcare spending a while back, and I think her quote was something like, "We can have universal healthcare if we just deficit spend every year to cover the full costs of universal healthcare." And I think it's trillions of dollars, which means like 3 years goes by, and your $200 weekly groceries go up to $1,000 within a couple of years or some ridiculous number, and then yeah.
The thing I would hope AOC would agree with is that we shouldn't let these hospital oligarchs rake in $20 million salaries and call them nonprofits. Like, I think Trump has rightfully identified some of these university endowments, but not everybody goes to Harvard, okay? But almost everybody goes to a hospital at some point, either for themselves or a loved one. And that's where, even if you wanted to give everybody free health care, actually, most of that money is going to hospitals and it's getting misappropriated. We need a full audit, and we need really to do something fundamentally different about reimbursements.
So what's in this this big, beautiful bill that Trump so desperately wants? You mentioned some things.
Yeah. So if we were just going to skinny it down to the things that Trump really cares about, it would probably be a renewal of what's called the Tax Cut and Jobs Act that was during his first term. They made the tax cuts for corporations permanent, but the tax cuts for individuals were not permanent. So you could renew those, and you could repeal the Green New Deal, root and branch, and you could probably get pretty close to something that I could vote for with a few other savings in there. Work requirements for able-bodied individuals without children on Medicaid, real work requirements, not ones with loopholes. You could pay for a renewal of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of Trump's first administration with just a few simple things that all Republicans should agree with. And let's throw in the rescissions of USAID and PBS.
So what's stopping this from happening? I mean, the Republicans control the House. Why is there this, I don't know, this breaking point?
The blue state Republicans are driving the bus because the Freedom Caucus Republicans won't say no. And the blue state Republicans are willing to take this thing down if they don't get their SALT handout, state and local tax deduction handout, which would be a reversal of Trump's policy, by the way. One of the great things about the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of Trump's first term is he got rid of this ridiculous notion that if you're from New York, you should pay less of a percent of your salary for national defense than somebody from Kentucky just because your property taxes are higher.
Yeah.
That was, getting
That's
rid
insane.
of that and having some sanity, having actual conservative tax policy was part of Trump's original Tax Cut and Jobs Act. And so they shouldn't water that down now. But to your answer, why aren't we doing that? Because the Freedom Caucus Republicans, a lot of them aren't willing to say no, although they might be this time around.
Man, I'm particularly worried about where we're going. I had a conversation. We did a debate show a couple weeks ago. We aired it last week. And with Trump trying to push through his agenda and using every interpretation of any law that he can, say like the Alien Enemies Act, and then this wave of universal injunctions, you've basically got an immovable object and an unstoppable force, and then Congress sitting in the bleachers eating popcorn, not doing anything. So
there's been a judicial coup, right? There's 677 federal district judges, any one of which could issue a nationwide injunction. So it's like a field of landmines with 677 landmines every time he tries to do something. Eventually that fixes itself because it does go to the Supreme Court, and Trump will win a lot of those, but they're robbing him of his most precious resource, which is time. When you get a mandate in an election, every day that goes by, the mandate weakens. And so they're robbing him of time in the courts, but Speaker Johnson's robbing him of time here in the House as well. We have not consummated any of the DOGE cuts. We were supposed to have voted on this before, and they just mysteriously didn't schedule the vote. And the Speaker's press secretary said, oh, no, we're going to do it when I called him on it. And that begs the question, when are you going to do it? Because here we are this week. Don't tell me we don't have time to do it. They just called off votes tomorrow. They're going to send us. We just had a 4-day weekend. This was supposed to be a regular American 2-day weekend coming up.
Wow.
But now they're going to give us a 3-day weekend. Do not tell me we don't have enough time.
Well, you're making it sound like that's a good job to have, being in Congress. A 4-day weekend, 3-day weekend? What am I doing? I'm working double shifts.
You're a fool, Tim. But somebody's got to pay our salary.
Yeah, I guess, right? Man, I'm feeling disappointed. I mean, was this expected of Speaker Johnson that he was going to run the ship this way?
Well, he promised to support Trump's agenda. His campaign for Speaker was that he would carry Trump's water, and he put it in neutral. And the problem with putting it in neutral is you actually have to fight for the conservative portions of Trump's agenda here in the House. You can't just let the courts run over the president. The problem is the courts, in some cases, have a point. For instance, an appropriations bill is a law. A lot of people don't realize this, but it passes the House and the Senate and it's signed by the president. So when you appropriate money for USAID, which they did in the continuing resolution, and appropriate money for NPR and PBS, the president has signed that into law. It's not clear that he can then decide not to follow a law that he has signed. And so that's where rescissions come in. There is a pathway in Congress that requires only 51 votes in the Senate to consummate some of those cuts that Doge wants to do and that the president is trying to do, that the courts are tying him up. It gives us our trump card, and we're not playing it.
You know, I'm just thinking about how there are a lot of members of Congress. We rarely hear the direct direct honesty, or the, you know, it just feels like they're just agenda driven. And I'm just wondering, is there something in the water in your district, or is there something missing from the water that your constituents have elected a guy who's being honest and consistently? Why? It's a joke, but why can't we get this from everybody else?
It's not in the water. It's in my bloodstream. I have the Trump antibodies. I was from a natural infection in 2020 when I opposed the CARES Act and he attacked me. And then I got 81% of the vote in a primary because my voters appreciated me being the only one that up here who was willing to say, if you print $5 trillion and you do these $2 trillion stimulus packages, you're going to pay for it sooner or later. My constituents appreciated that. And Trump eventually came around and endorsed me in the next election, but now I'm on his bad side again. So I guess I'm getting a booster of the antibodies. Or it could be a fatal, condition this time. It doesn't matter to me. Like, life's too short to come up here and tell people we can cut your taxes and increase spending and everything's going to turn out all right, because it's not. You're going to pay for it through inflation and a lower standard of living.
It sounds to me like if every member of Congress, but at least the Republicans, were being honest and actually cared to get the job done, they'd be largely agreeing with what you're saying. They'd push through a bill that made sense. Donald Trump would be very happy. Instead, it sounds like Trump knows he's not going to get a fair shake through Congress, so he wants whatever he can get, and then he gets upset with you because you're demanding a fair shake from Congress.
Yeah. I mean, it's fair. I can see his frustration. I just wish he would see who's on his side. I mean, like I said before, I'm the one who's carried the bill, no tax on Social Security, for over a decade and introduced a bill to not tax tips. And I want the rescissions that voted on. Like right now, I'm here calling out the speaker, have this vote, quit sending us home tomorrow. And I think he's just frustrated, and rightfully so. Congress is a bunch of do nothing people who are disingenuous and not rigorous and are always worried about their next reelection. Don't get me wrong. I have a lot of allies here who think exactly like I am thinking right now. It's just when it comes time to vote, they can't say no. And until you can say no, there's no negotiation. If you say, I don't like this, but I'll probably vote for it anyway, then you're not going to get anything. You're not going to get the fixes.
Why do you think Speaker Johnson has been doing what he's doing? And I suppose I'll clarify. It seems like everything's kind of half-assed.
Well, I mean, it is half-assed. If you're trying to get an argument out of me on that, you're not going to get one. But
why? The American way?
Frankly, he's a lost ball in tall weeds. He fell into this job. If you had somebody like Jim Jordan, who knows you have to fight every day instead of just putting it in neutral, then we wouldn't be in this situation. But we didn't get a Jim Jordan because the swamp, back when Kevin McCarthy was ejected, the swamp fought tooth and nail to keep Jim Jordan from ascending to speaker, when in fact it should have been him, and we wouldn't have these problems. So, I think, though, that Mike Johnson is going to be the speaker. Your next question may be, well, why don't you have a motion to vacate or something like that? Well, Marjorie and I tried that a year ago before the elections. And because we saw that once the elections happened, if we got the majority, it was going to be kumbaya, and people would just be happy to rubber stamp another term for Mike Johnson. But the reason we're not going to have a motion to vacate is Speaker Johnson is the speaker until Trump gets frustrated with him. And I don't know if and when that will happen, but I think at some point it should, because I just don't think Johnson's going to get this across the line, even the crappy bill, much less a good one.
It seemed like when McCarthy got ousted, the popular base for Trump was very much pro Jim Jordan. How does the swamp intervene to prevent something like that happening? What can they do? Or what did they do?
Well, there were 30 Republicans that were just ready to lose their next election.
Wow.
And they just kept voting against Jim Jordan every round. And it's because they're the big spenders. They knew, the swamp knew that he was a change agent. And so they just sort of like an organism with white blood cells, they attacked him. And they didn't care if it was going to cost them their next election. And it did cost some of them their re-elections.
Wow.
And some of them were going to retire anyway, but there are a few here. And I blame them. They bear the responsibility for this country going in the wrong direction and for the elements of Trump's agenda that are conservative not happening.
So this swamp, though, is this like the NRCC? Is this like the behind the scenes donors, the lobbyists, basically telling these Republicans, you won't get a penny, you'll get no donations, we'll cut you off unless you do what we want?
Part of it's that. I mean, they're good people at the NRCC, and their goal is to keep us in the majority. So I don't want to completely trash the NRCC, but the speaker uses the NRCC as a tool, like you just mentioned. And the lobbyists, they like a one-stop shopping place where all they got to do is lobby the speaker and get him to agree to something, because he controls what goes on the floor. And then he can control membership, although I think it's sort of the other way around. I think these members in vulnerable districts are controlling the agenda. Sometimes with a stronger speaker, you have the speaker controlling the members who are reliant on the NRCC and need another $20 million to get reelected in a marginal district. But that doesn't seem to be happening this time. It seems like they're driving the agenda because we have a weaker speaker now.
Yeah. My final question is, we got a couple minutes left. When Al Green was getting censured, Speaker Johnson calls him to face censure. Instead, Green starts singing and is joined by a bunch of Democrats who are obstructing the hall just singing. So Speaker Johnson just adjourns. And perhaps I'm a little aggressive in saying he should have the sergeant at arms come in and start arresting and removing people. But why is it that Democrats seem so ready to make moves like that? Republicans don't. They just let Democrats run roughshod all over them.
Because there's a double standard. Look, when we had a mask mandate in the House, I went to the well of the floor without a mask and brought 10 members with me and stood there on C-SPAN without a mask. And they fined me. They took it out of my salary.
Wow.
And I sued Nancy Pelosi over that, took it all the way to the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court wouldn't hear it for better or worse. They didn't want to intervene in congressional rules. And that may actually, there's a silver lining to their decision that they don't get involved, because that would be a whole nother can of worms. But as somebody who has been fined for behavior on the floor of the House and had my salary reduced, I can tell you there's a double standard. And the ethics committee didn't overturn Pelosi's ruling against me. And so, but there's definitely a double standard. But I don't know. Listen, Tim, I don't know why Speaker Johnson is putting Democrat bills on the floor every week, every freaking day. There's one or two Democrat bills that come to the floor. What is the deal that is being cut? Yesterday, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the former chair of the DNC, got a bill to the floor. Why is he bringing those bills to the floor and not bringing the rescissions to the floor? What deal is the uniparty cutting? I'd just like to know what the deal was.
Yeah, deep state deal saying we won't put you in prison after this is all over, like we did to Trump's lawyers or whoever else maybe. I mean, it's crazy what we've seen over the past few years, but yep, it certainly seems like we're not getting what we need through Congress. But Rep. Massey, I do appreciate you joining me. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up?
Well, I would just say there's a deep state, but there's also a deep Congress that I have encountered. So I'm here fighting the deep Congress.
Oh, man. Where can people find you?
Find me at Rep. Thomas Massey on X. I do my own social media. I'd fire my staff if they put half of what I put on there. The first thing they tell you is don't argue with idiots, but you'll see me doing it every day on Twitter.
It's working out.
Now known as X.
Yeah.
And look for the hashtag Sassy with Massey.
Right on, man. I really do appreciate you joining me and breaking this down for us. So thanks for joining us.
All right. Thanks, Tim.
Take care. And that was Representative Thomas Massie, who is he's the best. He's the best member of Congress we got. Love him or hate him. Sometimes he does things that it will aggravate us, but he's always honest about it. And you know the thing about it, you can predict how he's gonna vote because you know who he is, and he'll be honest with you. And there have been instances where, my attitude is more so, yes, we're not getting the perfect legislation we need for Donald Trump. Let's get through what he's asking for now so we can accomplish what we can. But it is fascinating when you listen to the guy and he breaks down for you that Speaker Johnson is putting Democrat bills on the floor, so that the issue is never really Thomas Massie. I think that, when we're hoping for some kind of compromise to get Trump what he needs, it's usually Thomas Massie doing the right thing and us accepting that we're going to be working with bad people who want bad things to try and just get a win through. So I have tremendous respect for the guy. And I wish every other member of Congress was like him, because then it'd be clean. We'd be done. I wish he was Speaker. But for now, we'll just keep getting Democrat bills, which is particularly disheartening. My friends, thank you so much for hanging out for this live hour. Smash the like button, share the show with everyone you know. Of course, we're going to be rating our good friend Russell Brand, who is gearing up to go live, I believe, right now. You can follow me on X and Instagram at Timcast. We're back at 8 p.m. I'm trying to type and talk at the same time. We're back at 8 p.m. Rumble.com/TimcastIRL. So don't miss it. It's going to be a lot of fun. And I really do appreciate everybody tuning in, hanging out. Maybe I can squeeze in. I did the raid. Maybe there's a Rumble rant I can grab. Guido says, the Native American Act of 1924 gave Native American citizenship. The 14th Amendment was ratified in 1868. And that clarifies things some of the 14th did not include. Some things. The 14th did not include everyone born here, indeed. Fire Hazard says, Thomas Massie for Speaker. Hear, hear. They would never let that happen. So shout out to Rep Massie. Great dude. Big fan. And we'll wrap it up there, my friends. Again, we're back at 8 p.m. Rumble.com/TimcastIRL. It's going to be a lot of fun. Let me see if I can look at our guests and see what we got. Very interesting. We're going to have Rep Burleson. Ooh, and Tim Alberino. I think. Maybe I'm getting that wrong. My friends, once again, smash the like button. Thank you all so much for hanging out, and we'll see you all tonight.